Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am in London, outside the National Liberal Club. You can see it behind me, founded in 1886, and perhaps you can see the letters above the door, NLC, National Liberal Club. Well, let's talk about the Liberal Party. It had their roots in the Whig Party. You go back to the early 19th century, the two parties, the Whigs and the Tories. In 1828, John Wilson Croker, an Irishman, first used the term the Conservative Party. But the Conservative Party is thought to be founded with Sir Robert Peel's Tamworth Manifesto in 1834. So Tories, still known by the nickname Tories to this day, but officially the Conservative Party. The Whigs were still going. It's quite complicated because there are factions of either party breaking off and going this way and that way. But broadly speaking, the Liberal Party grew out of the Whigs, and they were founded in 1851 over in St James's. I can show you that area as well. And the only thing they could agree on really was that there ought to be Italian unification and independence. So William Ewart Gladstone, formerly a Tory MP, was one of its leading lights. And they agreed that the Corn Laws, certainly having been got rid of, must not be brought back. Whereas the Conservative Party was still talking about reintroducing the Corn Laws, which is, say, an import tax on corn, which was inflating the price of corn artificially, just keeping it too high. Liberals were against that. The Liberals just generally wanted constitutionalism in mainland European countries, favoured parliamentary government back there. They looked back to the Whig heroes of the 18th century, such as Charles James Fox. They even claimed Pitt the Younger for one of their own. Obviously he's long dead, died in 1806. Pitt, was he a Tory? Was he a Whig? Was he simply a Pittite? That is very debatable. The Liberal Party generally talked about peace, retrenchment, reform. They wanted to reduce the discrimination against the nonconformists. Nonconformists were Protestants outside the established churches. Remember, in Ireland, the Church of Ireland was the established one. In Scotland, it was the Church of Scotland. In England, it was the Church of England. And in Wales, it was also the Church of England, not the Church of Wales. No such church. But by nonconformists, we mean Baptists, Methodists, and so forth. Protestants outside the established churches. There's obviously a Roman Catholic minority in the United Kingdom. In Ireland, we're all part of the UK, Catholics with a majority, over 70% of the population, small minority in Great Britain. So that was that. And they felt that the Tories were too afflicted by provincialism, too jingoistic, although the expression jingoism wasn't founded back then, too in hoc to the great landowners. They'd said that the Tories had favoured the landed interest and the Whigs had favoured the moneyed interest, and that continued somewhat into the late 19th century. So the Liberal Party was one of the two great parties of state and produced such prime ministers such as Viscount Palmerston, the Earl of Aberdeen, and eventually William Ewart Gladstone. The grand old man, GOM, or MOG, Murder of Gordon, as he later became when he failed to rescue General Chinese Charles Gordon. What else? So the Liberal Party was, as I say, one of the duopoly until the First World War. And that's where it all went wrong for them because, of course, liberalism believed in progress. Things were getting better. They were giving the vote to more people than before. More publicly funded education. And just generally helping the working class, but they're mostly a middle-class party. Although the Conservatives stole a march on them by, in some cases, being more progressive, doing more for the proletariat than the Liberals had done. Liberals were quite into free trade as well. Conservatives tended to favour protectionism, as to say tariff barriers. But the First World War came along, and that really seemed to shoot to pieces the notion that the world was progressing. And the state had to assume extraordinary powers. Of course, it was a Liberal government at the time under Henry Herbert Asquith. Liberal Prime Minister Churchill, Conservative, because he's from a Conservative family, had ratted, in his own word, to become a Liberal. Later, he was a re-rat to become a Conservative once again. But anyway, and David Lloyd George, he was the People's Chancellor with his People's Budget of 1910. He was in the Liberal cabinet. And in the First World War, the Liberal government was obliged to all these illiberal things. DORA, Defence of the Realms Act, which was extraordinary legislation for the government, allowing them to censor the press, allowing them to sequester all sorts of property, allowing them to nationalise things, like I've said, preventing emigration, restrictions on alcohol, and blah, 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 and eventually conscription, that's to say compulsory military service. But they eventually formed a coalition with the Conservatives in December 1916, when there was a parliamentary coup, as in completely legal and bloodless, for the Liberal Party, well, a faction of it under Lloyd George agreed to save under the Conservatives. So Lloyd George, a Liberal Prime Minister with a few Liberals and a majority of Conservatives as government, whereas H.H. Asquith, the official leader of the Liberal Party, was no longer Prime Minister. And this was a fatal fissure in the Liberal Party. And then after the First World War, politics turned into polarised. The Conservatives, which were clearly right-wing, and the Labour Party, which was clearly left-wing. And the Liberals were piggy in the middle. And they didn't seem to represent an interest, a social class. The Conservatives seemed to care more about the upper class and the bourgeoisie, whereas the Labour Party seemed to care more about the working man. That was to say the majority of people. You think the Liberals might win by being the centre, appealing to both ends of society, but that wasn't the case. And as I say, they were at each other's throats. And Asquith remained official leader of the Liberal Party till 1926, though Lloyd George was in many senses the coming man. And by 1922, they became the third largest party. Labour overtook them to become the official opposition. And 1923, that December, the Labour Party formed a government briefly, only lasted 10 months. Labour became the largest party, minority government. And the Liberals were pushed into third place, where have they remained ever since. And by the time of the 1950s, there's one stage when they had 5 members of Parliament. 5 out of 650. And then Jeremy Thorpe became leader, famously in 1966, hoping to revive the Liberal fortunes. And it was a curious era for him to take over as leader of the Liberal Party, because the party's days of power and might were well within living memory. Only 40-odd years before, there'd been a Liberal Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, who was very well known to Jeremy Thorpe. He regarded him as a grandfather, though he wasn't actually Thorpe's grandfather. But the Liberal Party was always hovering on the edge of extinction as a parliamentary party. And sometimes they had fantastic poll ratings, well over 30%, and Thorpe was perhaps rash enough to commit to paper his claim that he might win up to 150 members of Parliament. He won 14, which is a minor miracle. This first past the post system made it virtually impossible to break through, because of course whoever gets the most votes to constituency wins the seat, wins all the representation. So the Liberal Party, although they got 19% of the vote under Jeremy Thorpe, they were only getting about 2% of the seats. So the system was grossly unfair to them, very much discriminated in favour of the two larger parties, Labour and the Conservative and Unionist Party. But anyway, Liberal members of Parliament and peers of the realm and other members of the party would come here. This was their watering hole to socialise, a gentleman's club, not in the American sense. It's not a lap dancing club, or perhaps I should say a private members club. It was men only originally. Obviously, the ladies are there with parity these days. So men and women meet completely equal footing. You have to dress up, wear a suit, deep leather armchairs and oak-panelled dining rooms and drawing rooms and things like that. There used to be smoking rooms, libraries. You can use a computer in a bit of a business centre. They got no gym or swimming pool like they used to have in the old days. Rooms you can stay in. Thorpe was very involved in running it when he was obviously Liberal leader, and he put a Canadian chap in charge of the finances who unfortunately ran off with most of the money, showing a distinct lack of judgment on the part of Jeremy Thorpe, which was a weakness that was to plague him and eventually lead to his downfall. But that's another video. So the National Liberal Club, join if you can. You don't really have to be of Liberal views, and you can see all sorts of portraits of Liberal grandees from the days of yore. That is the National Liberal Club.